Well, hi, everybody. My followers here saw me gush about a memoir that I absolutely loved last week called Omega Farm by Martha McPhee. And I mentioned in my stories that I had spoken with her and she had agreed to do an interview with me. So I'm so thrilled today to have Martha with me. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Deb. I am so thrilled to be here, and I was so touched and thrilled by your review of the book. It spoke to me that you said a love story about a mother, something like that, and I just am so glad you saw that in this book that's sort
Absolutely.
of complicated. So thank you for
Well,
reading. Thank you for having me.
you're well, first of all, happy publication week because
Thank you.
this was your big week. It was Tuesday was your day, and I know that can make the week very wonky. So I'm grateful for, that you took the time this week. And yes, this is a layered book. I mean, there's a lot going on. You're right. I did see it as a love story from a daughter to her mother, but that's not all that it is. So let's start here with kind of what I always ask for is your an author's elevator pitch. Like if
Oh,
you tell us your synopsis of your book.
Okay, so it's the story of returning home during the pandemic to shelter in place with my mother, who has advanced dementia. She still does, and she was a little less far along when I came in 2020, March. We left, came down here, and immediately I started taking care of stuff because this house was in disrepair, and this one little thing led to a bigger thing, led to a bigger thing. And I pretty soon was going down that rabbit hole of both my past and my present, and unwittingly trying to fix stuff that is not repairable. And so it's that story, and getting to the end of it and realizing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, my daughter fled, my middle daughter, as we were just talking, fled the city during the pandemic as well. They went upstate to where we used to live, to Saratoga Springs. And yeah, I feel like we've talked about this in the book world, like the stories are starting to be told about what, for good, bad or indifferent, whether people are ready to read them or not. I think people who, you know, are writers and even some who just thought about writing, there was so much time to reflect
Yeah.
and to write. And I know it's coming out in fiction. I've seen it in a lot of novels, but I think this was my first memoir where, you really you dig into not only talking about fleeing the city, and you had two teenaged children who are, I mean, that's tricky,
It was.
to explain.
So I want to say that it's sort of the pandemic created this situation, but really, like, if the soundbite is a question, and I start a lot of my books, if not all of them, with a question that I don't even know I have, and this one was, can you go home again? I think so many people want to be able to go home, want to be able to return, want to, correct or explore or understand the past. And that is really at the root of this book. And the pandemic provided the circumstance. And then the other thing, when I was fixing all these things here, it led me into my mother's forest. She has a 35-acre forest, which led me to discover, trying to heal a forest, trying to take care of a forest. And this was a complete surprise to me, and became a real passion, became something that I wanted to spend my time thinking about. So those
It
were.
also is a really nice metaphor. The forest is almost became, I don't know, intended or not, I saw it as metaphoric for kind of the forest that you were trudging through in your life.
As a fiction writer, I think you can, you know not to push a metaphor too hard, but this metaphor, it happened organically. And as I was untangling the forest, I was trying to untangle my childhood and my past. And I didn't set out to write those two as a braid. But as I was writing it, in fact, when I wrote this as a proposal and sold it to my editor at Scribner, and I didn't really get into the past in the proposal. But when I started writing the book, it just led me right there. And it made like an inextricable sense.
Right. One thing led to another. Well, that's interesting, because that was kind of my next question was that I said, this is a combination of some very funny moments, because as Martha and I have talked about, I mean, we lived on a farm in Vermont for many years as our children were growing. I've talked about that a lot at Lone Star Words. I've talked about it on Sophie and I have a podcast called Generations. And we talk a lot about the farm and what a formative place. It was bucolic, it was formative. It was also exhausting. It sapped us of every bit of energy and every penny that we had. But I wondered, so there are those kind of those funny moments, and people will read, the bamboo stuff. I just kept saying, oh my gosh, we didn't have bamboo, but we had the most of the other stuff. But it also becomes a way, the book became a way for you, or seemed like a way to wrestle through demons, because there are some obviously this is spoiler free. People can, buy the book and read it, but there are some very dark, you had a somewhat unconventional childhood. I don't know if that's the right word. Would you say?
Yeah.
Unconventional in new parent. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I was born in the 60s, and it was still a pretty conservative time in my parents' marriage, who came out of the 50s. My mom was a housewife, basically had 4 daughters. My father brought home, he made the money. And then when their marriage ended, my everything blew up, and my mom went for somebody who was pretty alternative. And yeah, so I definitely unconventional. It wasn't the childhood that my friends were having in Princeton. It was a different kind of thing with, a lot of fun and exotic stuff, but there was also an undercurrent of complexity and difficulty.
Yeah. Oh, well, they would say what doesn't kill us makes us strong.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Right. Sometimes, but I mean, there's not a lot of families who can say, was it People magazine or Life, or that you were profiled?
Yes, we were.
And I was trying to think back. I'm like, I don't, I was like, gosh, I wonder if I saw that issue.
Well, it was in 75, so you would have been young.
Yeah.
It was also one of the first, issues of People magazine, which was an offshoot of Life.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah.
Where they wanted to focus on ordinary people, but Marlon Brando was on the cover, so they weren't really focusing entirely on ordinary people. So.
Right, for sure. Well, memoir, I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I say when I do, it's usually memoir, and I love it. And when done right, there's something, and this is definitely done right. It's just, it reads like a novel, and we always say that truth is stranger than fiction. Right. And surely, and surely that's the case here, but memoir is tricky because, and I said to you when we emailed, like, I've always dreamed about, and my father, who is still alive, was, you've got to write about the farm. You've got to write about the farm. And I don't really consider myself a creative writer, but part of me wants to tell that story because there is so much to tell. But there are things that I say in memoir that when people are still alive and talking about family members, I mean, I don't know if you've ever read Alexandra Fuller, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight. Yes. One of my favorite, all of her books. I've read them all. I love them all. Mm-hmm. And yet she ran into terrible problems with her family. being angry at what she wrote and not speaking to her. And I went to a speaking engagement. I went to an author event where she spoke in Cambridge, Mass once. And she talked about that it was the flip side of the coin. You get to, let yourself bleed, but you alienated other people. And so how did you walk that line? And do you feel that at all? Or
Well, of course I feel concerned because I don't want to hurt anybody. That's just not my thing. And I felt that I had to really interrogate myself very much if I was going to be interrogating other people. And I think that I am very honest about myself and the things that I did, my bad behavior. I also didn't write anybody else's story. We overlap, but this is really my story, and I stayed away from anything that wasn't mine unless there was a particular overlap. And the sister with whom I had the most overlap and the most sensitivity, I did speak, a lot about it. Or I don't know if it was a lot, but we definitely spoke several times, and she's very aware. But, Joan Didion said, give up now if you're afraid of hurting somebody, because writing is, it's if you're going to be honest and truthful, you're going to do that. And this is what I do. And I do believe I come from understanding and love. And I think that I couldn't have done this as a younger person, because I had too much, I hadn't maybe digested the whole thing yet. So, and I didn't maybe have the distance on it to allow, or the age. We all mess up. As hard as we try not to, we mess up.
Yeah. Well, it's the reflective manner, either the reflective way that you write and is so beautiful. But then also there are these moments where all of a sudden, unexpectedly you're like, there are these big moments, and so, obviously they're so real because they are real, but, we've all been in a fight with our siblings, and but the way you write, how you kind of wrestle, you wrestle through it. And I don't know. I said, I just kept saying, like, I feel like part of your story was my story. It was incredible sometimes. And that's why we read, like we read to know we're not alone. And to, often you find yourself in a story, but this was somewhat next level. I mean, we have, well, we'll jump back to that in a minute. As you were talking about writing and your decision to write this, can you speak a little bit to like your writing life? Because I know this isn't all that you do. You also, you're a professor.
Oh, right.
College professor.
So I've written 5 novels, and this is my 6th book as a memoir. And I do balance it with teaching. My career as a writer, I need the sinecure of teaching, and I love it. I love my students. I love my job. And so I try to balance those two. And then, for many of the years of writing the novels, I was a mom too, raising young kids, raising children. And so, that's a balance. This book was very different for me. My last one, An Elegant Woman, my 5th novel, took 8 years to write. This took 1 month, and it just came out of me. It just literally poured out of me. It was very exhilarating and curious making, because I hadn't intended the story to go in the direction that it went in. And so I put it aside for 6 months before I showed it to anybody. And then I read it again, and I felt comfortable, and I showed it to my editor and agent. And then I spent, several months revising. So it was very fast.
1 month?
I published my second to last novel, Dear Money, in 2010, and then An Elegant Woman in 2020. So there were 10 years. And so 2020, and now we're in 23. So only 3 years. I've never had anything like that. So it was
Clearly this story needed to come
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And that's but yeah, that's I've talked to a lot of authors, and I've heard everything from a decade, to a couple of years. But yeah, when we think about it. So are you someone who has like a writing space? I mean, we were all locked. I mean, if the pandemic, I mean, I know a lot of books are coming out of that, that time, because we were all
Locked it
locked in
down.
our houses. I actually
I
would have loved to be locked on my farm. I wish I had still lived there.
I mean, it was such an awful time for so many, and so much death and destruction. But I felt incredibly grateful that I was able to be here with my children. I got them back again, even though my son resisted at every turn. My daughter was really gung ho, and I got to try these things that I wouldn't have understood otherwise. So, I sort of can't be. I'm at my mother's house right now, and it's painful. She's dying, and I had to find ways to find joy and find purpose, and tending the gardens and raising chickens and taking care of dogs and all of these, and then the forest stuff, all of these projects really helped anchor me, and help really give me a sense of purpose, and understand, especially the forest, how how we're part of something that's much larger than our lives.
The passages about that in the book, and your husband, kind of like lying down in the field, and what, I outlined so many passages. But as you just spoke about having, your maternal instinct mimics mine a lot. And our youngest daughter was living here before going to medical school during COVID. And I remember thinking, well, that, like, as terrible as this is, you have her and cooking. And there's a quote from page 54 that I want to read. And this is so beautiful. And I know probably what I'm going to say, but and I'm quoting Omega Farm here. But my fantasy, I had my children back again. They were under a single roof in an alternate domestic universe in which I got to mother them all over again, but better this time, because of what I'd learned, that time passes far too fast. Yes, we all know that. But even so, it is a shock over before you can reckon with what needs to be reckoned with. I wouldn't yell at my children. I wouldn't be distracted by work and worry. I wouldn't be anxious and fearful. And I mean, I teared up when I read it. And it's so true. All of it's true. It's so fast. It's so fleeting. And I often say, if only I could get those years back, our time on the farm, which is where our girls grew up. And I think I said to you, my youngest daughter said, gosh, I wish we had to shelter in place at Ox Pasture Farm, it would have, but it's a beautiful lamentation on realizing, like, seize the moment.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing that I discovered with my novels, because I write autobiographically, even though there's the veil of fiction, and it's not like a memoir at all. But I feel like I could, especially with my grandmother and even with my stepfather, in writing a couple of the novels, I felt like I could be with them again. There's sort of like this little resurrection, and you can do that if you write about your farm. You get to go back in a way
that's a really good point. And sometimes I think to myself, I get it's kind of like looking at photographs of when your children were young and all of that, and it's joyful, but it's also painful.
it is painful.
Because you just say, I always say, my mother always said, it goes so fast. Don't sweat this. This is not a big deal. It's going to be over before you blink. And when you're in the throes of it, a colicky baby, or the stuff on the farm, stuff, it was so, I mean, Martha and I have talked about, but our land was in we had 60 acres in Vermont. It was all in a land trust, the Vermont Land Trust. which is like, Martha describes it well in the book, but you're really working with a forester who has a plan for your property, and you're supposed to abide by that. And you do get somewhat little tiny tax break. But owning and caretaking a property this size it's an enormous job. It's an enormous job. And I was a stay-at-home mom with 3 little girls. And we had horses, and they were riding, and I mean, we had horses, guinea hens. We took on a flock of sheep for a while. Lots of dogs. But the land was like another species. It's just, you're constantly, my husband would come home. I mean, he was working a day job, and he would come home, and I'd be like, there's a tree down across we also had like, the 3/4 of a mile long driveway. The water in the barn isn't running. This, that. There's
always something
pulling at you until, like I said, she talks about a very large septic disaster, which sounds funny, but when it happens on a property of this size, and the same thing, you watch your toilets bubbling, and the next thing you have all of this heavy equipment down, and they're trying to find a place for a leaching field because there wasn't one. And my husband and I, that was when we kind of were like,
done.
I think that's it. And we had to drill a well that year too. Our well ran dry, which is very
really a scary thing too, because if you don't find the water, it can just be a huge expense for nothing. So.
And the dowsing, we had the dowser, very old like method of finding the water. And he came out with a dowsing stick. And I thought all the things though, and I'm sure you think this too, that your children learned, all of the college essays were written right there.
Yeah. My daughter was already in college, but yes,
yeah, I mean, it's just one of these things, like, where else can you say we tapped our own trees for maple syrup, and we did all these things that but again, it's a third job. It's really a third job. So it's nice that
you have to caretake the land. I mean, this is still my mother's property. She's still alive. We don't know what will happen with it when she does eventually die. And there are 5 sisters, and there are 5 step siblings as well. And so there's a lot to be sorted through, but this is 35 acres of this property are forest, and they need attention. And it's an important job, because as I write in the book, the small privately owned forests by small landowners are between 1 and 100 acres and represent Texas times, half again the size of Texas. That is a lot of forest. That
was a staggering statistic. I did not know that.
And just in the United States, so that it's a lot. And most people think that the forest takes care of itself, and it doesn't. It requires some assistance. And so it's a big job. You're right. It's its own species. It is.
Well, it's the same with when we talk about the deer on the property, and we had deer in our horse pastures, and I knew them, and I would see the fawns and all of that. And we were posted, but everybody wanted to hunt on our land. And I know that culling but as an animal lover, it was one of these things that pulled at me constantly. I'm like, you can't hunt on I have children, and I have horses and animals, but it's just, so it's complex, and you really become a steward of something so much bigger than yourself, that you are ill prepared. I know that we thought, we were just like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I never paid attention as a kid, and I never paid attention as a weekend visitor. And then when I was here, I suddenly had to, for practical reasons, but also because of my curiosity. Like, I kept being pulled deeper and deeper into the situation. And I came to understand that the problem of deer, because you need the trees to survive. So, and they struggle, at least here, because of, this symbiosis with the invasive species and the deer. So they take over and create a monoculture that makes it really hard for the native species to shoot up, also because that's all that the deer want to eat is the native stuff. So it's complicated.
It is very complicated. And I mean, I have to say, reading this, you did a great job. And you do, like we always say, that you do the best you can with anything. But when I'm asked, people say, how did you do this with the horses or this with the land? I said, I tried to surround myself with people who knew more than I did, who I trusted. And there's also that you're being looked down on a little bit. And you wrote about that, we were Flatlanders, from Massachusetts buying this Vermont farm. What did we know? And people are kind of like, but once they get to know you and understand that you are wrestling with so much, it's a beautiful and huge part of this. And the way you work the nature into the family story and the story of your mom's decline. And it's complex and it's beautiful, and it's also, I commend you. It is a readable, we talk about book bloat a lot, books that are just it's tight.
Oh,
It's just not, it's just the right length. So, okay, I know this question often, you don't have to answer it because I know it's taboo for some authors, but are you writing again? I mean, do you have?
Yes, I'm writing a novel, and it's a love story that's set sort of against World War I and the aftermath of World War I. And my father gave me the idea, and it's which I find really wonderful, because I'm not usually interested in some idea that somebody will say, but this one did strike me. And I was working pretty hard on it because I was on sabbatical, but then I stopped basically this summer for various reasons, but I'll go back to it pretty soon. And partially set in France, so I get to go to France. I already went once, so for
Sounds
this
terrible.
I know.
That's great. No, that's and World War, we always say that World War II, you said World War I, right?
Yes.
Yeah, World War II has gotten so much airtime in fiction, but World War I, not so much. And I like that.
Yeah, and also it's a different angle. It's from a woman, that the woman in the love affair who's left behind. So in America. So it's not I mean, but there is a portion set in Contrexeville, and that was a place where young a battalion of doctors went to create infirmaries in this spa town. And it's the narrator's future husband, her lover, boyfriend, is based in Contrexeville, and that's the title of the book. So yeah, I'm excited.
Look forward to it. I haven't read your fiction, so I need to do that. I'm famous for going down rabbit holes after loving, and I think it's always very interesting to read how different an author is in fiction to nonfiction. But so, okay, well, I warned you about this question. I always round out my interviews with it because I love it, and people who listen love it too. And there's no rules to this, books that you that are like touchstones to you, authors you love, or like the last great book you read, whatever.
Yeah, so whenever I read a book that I love, it's my favorite book, and then a new one will come along. And I just read The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. And did you read that?
I did read it, and one of the last two authors, it wasn't Claire Fuller, I want to say it was Madeline Lucas, maybe. That was one of her books too. I love it. And if you're a dog person, animal person, but
yeah, I'm totally a dog person. But what I also love about it is that it's all about writing. And
yes.
And yet you're still immersed in this world of fiction, and her, this fictional orbit. And I think it's just astonishing and beautiful and simple. in terms of the language, it's very elegant and
Beautiful
no
writer.
big acrobatics in the language, just beautiful.
I
And
would
so
agree.
I love her. I'm also reading The Seven Moons of Ali Almeida. I might have gotten
Yeah.
that last part wrong, but he
Okay.
won the Booker Prize. The author won the Booker Prize last year in 2022, and it's set in Sri Lanka. The author Sri Lankan, and I lived in Sri Lanka around the time that he's writing about, and it's all about the politics, and it's told from the point of view of somebody who's just been murdered, and he's sort of alive as a ghost, and there's and he's trying to figure out who killed him, and so it's and also he was a photographer, get the negatives of images he took that will reveal this larger corruption. And
Oh, wow.
it's got so much momentum. It's funny. At times it reminds me of The Inferno by Dante, and
Mhm.
because he places people in hell basically, and it's just rich and wonderful.
As
So
Booker books are, I should know this. I should, if it's a Booker winner, I should know it, but okay.
yeah, no, and then books that I go back to, and that one that stands out that I go back to a lot is Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried.
Yes.
I just love that book, and
He just wrote again. He's got a book.
I see that.
And I didn't realize that, but one of the
Oh,
podcasts I listened to
yeah, I
mentioned
was
it.
so glad to hear that because it'd been a
Been
while,
a
and
while.
wasn't sure what was going on. I think he lives in Texas, or he did at some
Oh, is
point.
that right? I
Yeah,
didn't know
I
that,
don't
but
know, so I don't want to spread rumors about
that's okay. There's a lot of authors hiding here in Texas.
it.
But yeah, no, I remember that was such a formative, like, high school book that that my daughters read, and then we saw it performed. And but yeah, when someone mentioned him having something out, I don't know anything about it, but it's definitely
No, I
something
think
to look
it got
for.
a good review somewhere. I read it, but might not actually be available yet. It might come in October. I'm
Okay.
not sure, but it's
The
on the horizon.
fall literary scene, you probably know this better than anybody, is so rich.
It's rich.
Yeah.
There's so many good writers out there. It's just,
All with, I mean, with new, Nathan Hill and Jesmyn Ward, and I'm reading The Bee Sting now. Murray, I'm forgetting his Palmer. I mean, there's just I mean, Ann Patchett,
yeah,
you. It's just like we were saying in our book club that, some fall is always the best. I mean, for me, my favorite books come out in the fall, but this one just knocked it out of the park.
it really, it's a great fall for readers.
Yeah, and we don't know. We're like, is that because of COVID? Because, but it's just
Yeah,
there's
maybe.
you're the TBR is stacked very high. So,
Yes.
well, thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this. This was such a treat, and to get to know you. And this is Omega Farm by, it's hard to see here, by Martha McPhee. And this photograph is so well chosen. Did you play a role with that?
I selected a bunch, and then they
Yeah.
chose it. We went back and forth, but we all landed on that. My mother took the photograph. She's a photographer,
Oh, yes. Yes. There's so much
and
about that in the book.
yeah, that's her and her but work, and it's of me.
Yep.
And when I was about 10 or 11, and yeah, I think it's a great picture. She just had a
It
way.
speaks volumes.
It does.
What is it? A picture's worth 1,000 words. But so this was out Tuesday, Scribner. And yeah, Martha, thank you ever so much. I'll let you get back to the farm.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Going to do some gardening. And thank you, Deb, so much for
Oh.
having me, for reading it. It's been fun.
Oh, it has. Let's stay in touch.
Yes.
All
Take care.
right. Have a
Bye.
wonderful day. Bye.